Hi there, this is Clovis. This video is about the new version of PhysXPainter, so version 2.0, and we're going to talk about assets management. So I changed a bit how PhysXPainter works. So now we have to go into helpers, Kinematic Lab, and create a PhysXPainter helper in the scene. So it's not like before you picked a ground geometry and everything was stored on an attribute holder in the ground geometry. Right now, it's all stored in the helper, which is way better to handle everything. And the main reason for that is that now we can use multiple ground geometries, multiple colliders. So having just one with everything accessible in an attribute holder is not a good idea anymore. So I have this helper. If I select it, I go in its UI here and I press Open PhysXPainter UI, and it's going to open this UI. So you see three tabs here. The first one, Source, is about all the objects you're going to use in your simulations. So I'm going to select all the geometries I need as a colliders. So I will just press the plus button here and they are going to be added in the scene. Okay. And now I will have to select some assets here that I've prepared to make some tests. So I will just select all of them. Okay. Yeah, and I press the plus button. Right. So they've been added in this list. Okay. And what has changed as well is that right now you don't have to create low-res versions of your assets anymore because it's done automatically when you add them here. So when you have a look at this wheel, for example, you see that the geometry is very low. This is because when we add them in the list, it creates a new modifier KHL here, which does the low-res version. So you can, if this is not enough vertices for you to simulate or to see the mesh correctly, you can just change this and press generate, and it's going to generate a new version of your low-res. All right. Okay. So, but 200 vertices is really a good balance for a nice simulation. The less, the better, of course. Right. So each asset has this modifier, and you can, when you press switch here, you can display or hide the low-res version. Fine. So these assets have been added in this list. And you see that here you have some options, assets parameters. You can change the percentage here of the assets you have been selecting here. Okay, so you select some assets and you can change their percentage. It's going to be so more or less of these assets when you're painting. Okay, and also you can change the vertex counts. Okay, like we did here on each one, you can do that on all the selected assets from the list. So if you want, for example, let's select them in the scene too, so we know which ones here. So if we want them to be, I don't know, maybe 50 vertices, I press generate low, and the low-res versions have changed. Going back to 200, generate low, and that's it. Right, so from these lists, you can do a few things. So you can add assets to it. You can remove assets as well. So I'm going to select them. Okay, that's those assets. I'm going to remove them. Okay, so they are not in the list anymore. So I will add them back. Right, here they are. Okay, and you saw that I just used these two options, so this is super handy. For example, if I select these assets in my list, I would like to know which ones are selected from the list, but in my scene. So I will just press this button, so select list to scene, okay, and it's going to select the assets here. And what if I have some assets selected here and I would like um, to see which ones are in the list? Okay, so I just press this button, select scene to list, and it's going to highlight the selected assets in my list, which is very useful, for example, when you want to change the percentage or change the vertex count on specific assets that you have selected in your scene. So for example, I like these assets and I would like to use, I don't know, maybe those in my simulation. So I click here to select them on the list, and I will say 100% of them here. But I would like all the others to be 0%. So when I paint, they are not going to be added in the scene. So I also have shortcuts in the list. So if I press Control, it's going to invert the list selection, and I can do 0. So only the previous assets are 100, so they are going to be painted, and the others will not. So Control I to invert selection, Control A to select all, Control D to deselect. And that's the same on the colliders list. So Control I to invert, Control A to select all, Control D to deselect. So to do mass editing on assets, this is just super useful. So let's say I want to paint with those assets. I select them here. I set whatever percentage I want. Now I invert my selection and say 0. And now only those are going to be painted. So yeah, that's how you add the assets in the system. Now there is something else. If you go back to the helper, so you can select it here, or you can just, if you have some assets selected, you can select it from this button. If you go here in the modify panel, you see some options here. So the first button is opening this UI. This is changing the size of the icon. And this list is the source objects, so all these objects. So here you can just select in the list, and you have some options here. But before we do anything here, we have to paint some assets in the scene to understand how it works. So I'm going to select everything and put that to 20%. And now I'm going to paint some assets in my scene. So the first time you press the paint button, it's a bit longer. The second time, it's instant. So let's add these assets like that. Okay. When I release the mouse button, it's going to simulate the physics. And if I right click, it will stop the simulation. So I have my assets here. So if I go back to my PhysXPainter helper, you will see some options. For example, if I select some elements here, I can select the copies in the scene, for example. So these are the selected copies. Okay. I can select the source objects of these assets. So if I press sources here, it's going to select these assets. Okay. I can select all, so all these objects. I can also, so for simulation reasons, they are not instances, they are copies. But at the end of your simulation, you will have to turn them into instances for, memory consumptions, reasons, and optimizations, and whatever you want to do, or if you want to edit the asset geometry. So you will have a button here to change these and the selected assets from the list, for example, all of them, into instances. So turn to instance. Boom, and that's it. So if I wanted to edit, for example, this mesh, I could add an X4 modifier on top of it and change its gizmo scale, and it's going to affect those as well because they are instances. Or you can replace its geometry using a replacer or whatever. So yeah, they are instances, and you can turn them back to copies. You can select them, turn to copies, so they are not instances anymore. You can do that only on just the selected ones here, so turn to instances, and only some of them. I don't remember which one I selected, but I'm never gonna find them. Whatever. Let's go back and turn to copy. But yes, this affects only the selected ones in the list. Also, you have some display options. You can display as box again for scene speed. That can be better. Okay. You can also here switch from high to low. So this is just changing the state of the K-hole modifier. Okay. So high or low. So when you finish your simulation, you want them to be like your higher res meshes, so you turn them back to high. Okay, and we have some collapse options here. So for now, they are all separated objects. So even if they are instances, there are cases when you want to collapse all into one mesh and use that in your scene, or duplicate it, or do whatever you want, or just collapse and simulate other assets without taking those into account. So I can collapse everything here, or just the selected assets, right? Or you can clone and collapse. That's what I'm going to do here because it's not going to destroy what I've done. So let's try all, for example. And yeah, and that's it. It makes a snapshot of everything and adds it into only one mesh, okay, which can then be duplicated. Right, and the other option is clone and collapse the selection. So let's select the spray can, for example, and press clone and collapse selection, and it's going to only attach the spray cans. And we have the delete all button here. So when I press it, it's going to delete all the painted assets. Right, so this was about assets management. Let's see if I forgot to talk about something. No, we're going to talk about the other things like the brushes, the presets, the physics into other videos. Thanks for watching. See you. Bye-bye.